Assessing shoulder flexion and overhead exercise selection. The majority of clients don't possess enough shoulder flexion range of motion to perform a strict overhead press independent of lumbar extension. Visually, this presents as the lower back arching to provide a false sense of overhead shoulder mobility. This is even more so the case for our athletes who use manual wheelchairs or loft-strand crutches, since they commonly rest in a position of humeral internal rotation, which over time can limit shoulder flexion. This mobility restriction can also be due to tightness in the pecs, lats, and subscapularis. We'll cover strategies to address this later in the video. But in addition to finding ways to improve shoulder flexion mobility, we can more appropriately match exercise selection to the range of motion that a client legitimately possesses. The first step is assessing how much that is. The two assessments that we commonly use to do so are back-to-wall shoulder flexion for our athletes who are able to stand independently, or hook-lying shoulder flexion, which will be accessible for any athlete that is able to transfer to the ground and comfortably lay on their back. In this example, we'll cue the athlete to take a full exhale to move the rib cage down and get their lower back flush to the ground. From here, he'll use his abs to maintain this position and begin reaching overhead. If you see the rib cage flare and the lower back lift up off the ground, movement beyond that point is not shoulder flexion from the glenohumeral joint. One external cue that we can provide is placing a resistance band underneath the client's lower back. He'll follow the same setup and execution, but now I'll be pulling on the band. He'll have that tactile feedback to keep his lower back flush to the ground, and it allows me to identify the point where he loses his positioning. Despite our best efforts to cue a vertical path and elbows to the ears, you'll notice Sam's range of motion overhead during the assessment closely resembles the path of the dumbbells during this example of a seated overhead press. Instead of using this exercise, we can look for a more biomechanically efficient option that matches the range of motion that our athletes possess. This is why we tend to favor Landmine and Viking press variations. The barbell path is more aligned with the athlete's overhead mobility and encourages proper upward rotation of the scaps, which strengthens the serratus and lower trap, two muscles that play a role in rotator cuff health. The importance of the cuff is well documented for functional ability in manual wheelchair users. While our exercise selection should match the mobility that a client currently possesses, we can still take steps towards improving overhead mobility. A few exercises that we commonly use to both lengthen and strengthen the muscles that can restrict shoulder flexion range are soft tissue work on the pec with the AccuMobility ball, PVC kneeling T-spine, dumbbell pullovers, and single arm cable lat pull downs. For our athletes who can transfer out of their chair and into a tall kneeling position, we've been programming this hand-supported single arm lat pull down, which gives us more range of motion than seated options and allows us to strengthen the lats through the eccentric portion. Over time, this could improve overhead mobility. You can claim that there are no bad exercises, just poor applications, but the key to effective programming is selecting the best tool for the specific individual.